Hello and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, in a historic move, the Polish government's majority in parliament has voted to strip legal immunity from Jarosław Kaczynski and Mariusz Błaszczak, senior leaders of the opposition Law and Justice Party. Now, Kaczynski faces a defamation case after accusing a ruling coalition politician of repugnant crimes, while Błaszczak is under investigation for disclosing classified military plans during his time as defense minister. The decision follows a closed parliamentary session with the ruling coalition backing the move, leaving the opposition sharply divided. Now, to talk more about all of this, I'm joined in the studio by Jowanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor, Faculty of Law and Administration from the University of Warsaw. Good to have you in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's take from a broader perspective. Let's step back here. Prominent cases here in the Polish Sejm, in the parliament. 3 MEPs, including opposition figures. Let's talk about this immunity. Tell us from the Polish law, why is this so critical and why does this affect this so much? Why it's essential? Let's talk about that first.
Immunity for members of parliament, for politicians, is actually not a Polish invention. It's an legal instrument which is present in all democratic countries. And it's dating from actually medieval times, from when the first parliaments have started to gather. So the idea of immunity is to provide every member of parliament with the possibility to act within their mandate and not being prosecuted for any activities that this member of parliament is doing. But also another very important part of immunity is that the member of parliament cannot be arrested or even detained without the consent of the parliament, which is especially important when some votings are taking place in the parliament and there is also a need to secure majority of votes, or specific debate or specific acts of parliament are debated, and all the members of parliament should feel secure that they can take part in the political process.
So it does have its roots elsewhere, but nevertheless, if we're looking also in a functioning democracy, if we're looking at it, there is a judiciary as well in such a form, and this kind of legal protection, is that, let's say, something that is necessary right now? Do we really need it?
I believe it is necessary because in every democratic system, kind of immunity exists. Sometimes it is wider, sometimes it is maybe more narrow. However, it does exist. Let me give you an opposite example from Turkey, which actually decided to remove the immunity from their constitution and from the legal system. And immediately after that, several members of parliament from the opposition parties have been arrested. So here we can see that in some of the declining democracies, let's say, removing immunity can really pose a substantial, important threat to the opposition members of parliament.
So something critical for the state. Now, looking at its values historically, if we're looking at Poland's democratic system, it seems every opposition party promises to reduce or even abolish immunity. We've seen that and heard that. But once in power, it's often that promise they break first. So talk a bit about how you see this and if that's going to just be something that's going to continue in this political landscape.
Well, indeed, it's always in the interests of the party members to have this kind of protection, legal protection against being arrested or being detained. So it is in the interest of political elite not to remove this kind of immunity. But as I just tried to explain, it is a much wider aspect of providing the platform for the politicians to act and not to be afraid of taking action, even though that sometimes they might be their actions might not be comfortable for the government, for the ruling party as well.
Let's take a look at some of those particular high-profile cases right now. One I think that sticks out is Mr. Błaszczak, the former defense minister. Now, there's some serious things here, looking at the kind of allegations, illegally declassifying a document related to the Polish military and plans there. So what kind of punishment could he receive if this now goes ahead and goes to prosecute? What are we looking at?
Well, when it comes to Mr. Błaszczak, he's the former Minister of Defense, and these accusations are actually quite serious because he's accused of declassifying important documents, important information when it comes to plans of Poland of defending the country against eventual aggression from outside. Meaning that declassifying those information can serve as a base for any external threats to actually take this information into consideration. So this is actually quite a serious accusation.
And also looking at another one is Mr. Dariusz Matecki. Tell us a little about here what's happened and what he could be facing as well.
Mr. Dariusz Matecki is facing a different scale of accusations. He is also a member of parliament and member of the former ruling coalition, meaning that he is involved in one of the biggest scandals of the former government, Law and Justice government, which was the Solidarity Fund and the money that was actually laundered in this fund by the previous Ministry of Justice. But he is actually facing more than 5 or even 6 charges, as far as I know, and he can actually be accused of several of them, and the sentence can be even up to 10 years if that would be summed up.
And also, let's take a look at Mr. Kaczynski, also a very prominent one here with this whole process. Now, this case is also defamation brought by an MEP, by Mr. Krzysztof Brejza. So these kinds of disputes, do they need to be settled in Parliament? Is there another way to settle this in your mind, legally speaking, or is this the forum for this? How do you see that proceeding?
Well, they are not settled in the parliament. That's the first thing. The parliament is only looking at the cases and deciding whether to lift the immunity or not. But the whole procedure is undertaken by the public prosecution and by the courts. So the parliament is only allowing the procedure to happen. But the parliament is not forming any legal charges against any politicians. This is the job of the public prosecution and then also the court to decide whether they were indeed guilty of committing those offenses or not. Also, what I would like to underline is that lifting the immunity works only in this specific aspect, in the specific act that they are accused of. So it's not that the immunity is totally lifted and they could be accused of anything. It's only in the specific case that the immunity is lifted, and this is the only space for the public prosecution and for the court to act.
And we're looking at this, I mean, this is something that the current government has very much also pledged to go after, and this kind of prosecuting former injustices by the coalition government in the past. But how long would these kind of procedures take now? I mean, lifting of the immunity, looking at the next steps, and then, as you said, in the court. So what are we looking at until a verdict is reached, a final sentence is passed? How long does that take?
It does indeed take a long time, especially having in mind that the procedures take place not only in the parliament, but it takes time for the public prosecution to actually go to the court and to accuse those politicians of the specific acts, of the specific offenses. And also, the courts are not very quick when it comes to making the decision, and the whole idea of reforming the courts in order to improve their efficiency, which was actually one of the major justifications of the reforms that were done by the previous government, has not been delivered. So the courts indeed act quite slowly, and it does take time to actually wait for the final result of the procedure.
Well, needless to say, the opposition, Law and Justice, they've cried wolf here. They're adamantly against all this. We've seen some quite powerful statements by them. But tell me this, is this something that is only in the realm of what this current government has done, or has maybe, are there instances in the past where the former government has also pursued this kind of lifting of immunity?
Well, lifting of the immunity works in cases where specific accusations are against specific politicians. So we need to have a specific allegation or even accusation in order for the parliament to remove the immunity on the specific case. So indeed, we have in this specific situation the case of already, I think, more than 10 politicians which are facing substantial charges by the public prosecution. And every procedure needs to be conducted separately. So on every case and every accusation, the parliament needs to decide separately. This is also why it indeed takes quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. I think also if we look back a little bit of history, I think there's also, if we're looking at some deputies, Stefan Niesławski, Cezary Grabarczyk, Sławomir Nitras, these were also people, right, that were in the crosshairs of Law and Justice, right?
Absolutely, because this procedure works for every, let's say, political party and every government. So this is not a procedure which is only against the politicians who are currently in the opposition. This is an instrument which is used by every government, and rightly so, because if the politicians are accused of committing some crimes or some offenses, they should be brought to justice, and there should be a possibility to bring them to justice. The whole philosophy of having immunity is that they are not detained on a spot and they are not prevented from fulfilling their mandate immediately. It's just it needs to take time for the parliament to lift the immunity and then for the public prosecution to take action.
Mm-hmm. I also kind of want to widen the scope a little bit as well, because we've also had certain MEPs, right, Polish MEPs, who've also gotten into legal issues, and then the European Parliament. What's that process look like? It seems to be a bit more complicated of then also removing their immunity potentially.
Actually, the philosophy is very similar, meaning that the European Parliament needs to be informed on the basis of the charges, and then the European Parliament also has a specific procedure to lift the immunity of the member of European Parliament. So the philosophy is the same. Procedure is, I think, more or less also similar. Again, it does take time. There is also a parliamentary committee in the European Parliament that needs to review this kind of request. But in the end of the day, the idea is the same, meaning that the politicians should be protected from this kind of immediate action, from being detained, from being stopped of being able to perform their activities. But on the other hand, there needs to be a clear possibility for the public prosecution to act when there is a substantial evidence that some offense or some crime has been committed.
Right. So I think, as you said, a very critical component of Polish law, Polish politics, but also not just unique to Poland, but across Europe and other countries. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming in here. That was Jowanka Jakubek-Lalik, professor from University of Warsaw. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.